My name is Mark Shockley. I'm a master's student at the University of North Dakota, and today I'm going to be talking about some special functions of the diminutive in Arabic proper nouns. And I'd like to thank the Olive Organizing Committee for accepting this paper. My own master's thesis is on Qatari Arabic, but for the purposes of this study of diminutives, I gathered about 8,000 proper nouns from J.G. Lorimer's Gazetteer of the Persian Gulf, which is widely regarded for its thoroughness and also betrays a pretty detailed knowledge of Arabic and of the dialects at hand. The dialects included in this study area include Omani, Nejdi, Gulf, and Iraqi. Other areas of the Arabian Peninsula, such as Dhofar and Yemen and the Hejaz region, are not included in this data. In addition to data from Lorimer, I gathered about 500 plant names from Mandeville's Bedouin Ethnobotany, and I also gathered about 5,000 common nouns from various lexical sources on Gulf Arabic. When you talk about diminutive nouns in Arabic, there are quite a few different noun patterns that have been written about as being diminutive. However, in the dialects in this study, there were mainly these three categories. These were not evenly distributed across different semantic categories. So among most proper noun categories, by far the most common category, the most common diminutive form, was the first pattern, which in contemporary dialects is usually unambiguously indicated by the close mid-vowel. However, since Lorimer was writing formally, he usually wrote it as a diphthong. Proper noun is not a 100% clear cut in semantics. However, it has been defined as a noun that lacks intension, and intention in semantics is another word for sense, or the combination of distinctive features that make up a concept. So an example will clarify this better. So if I talk about a disk, I'm talking about something that's round and flat. And if I talk about something that's round and flat, I'm also talking about a disk. So that relationship between sense and the common noun is injective. It goes both ways. Whereas for a proper noun, such as Mark Twain, I could list a number of characteristics that describe Mark Twain, such as he's a sarcastic American writer. But if I continue listing these characteristics, there is no number of characteristics that I could give you that could force you to inevitably come up with Mark Twain. Arabic nouns were encountered as diminutive in all of these categories. So every category that could be construed as being a proper noun in language included diminutive nouns in the Arabic dialects in question. The connection between diminutives and proper nouns has been hinted at by a number of researchers, but very little theoretical attention has been paid to the strong overlap between proper nouns and diminutives. So Mandeville, in his study of plants, points out that the diminutive form is very common in these names, and he was very perceptive when he pointed out that it's if anything more common in place names and personal names. Johnston does briefly mention this connection, and also Maslia, in his study of the diminutive in spoken Iraqi Arabic, does point out that there are a number of wild animals that occur in the fu'ail pattern, and he also points out large and courageous tribes that occur with diminutive names. However, he doesn't propose any connection between the morphological pattern of the diminutive and the semantics of proper nouns. So he takes these to be ironic, pragmatic uses of the diminutive, but in my analysis, these are actually proper nouns, and the diminutive is used in a different way here. So diminutive proper nouns are well attested across every type of proper noun, across the entire history of Arabic and across many regions. So starting from the 4th century in inscription data and in the Petra papyri, there are numerous diminutive proper nouns, diminutive place names. There are many diminutive names in pre-Islamic poetry, and there are dozens of diminutive toponyms in al-Mufaddaliyat. There are several diminutive proper nouns in the Quran, and there are also many diminutive toponyms from Arabic roots in Spain, as well as in the Arabian Peninsula and Sudan. I'm going to give a quick overview of some functions of the diminutive. So, sahan, which could be a dinner plate, becomes sahain, which might be a dessert plate, so a smaller plate, a small type of plate. Alich means gum, but alayich means, it's gum, but you're referring to it in a polite way. So this is an expressive use of the diminutive. And the diminutive in this word might not denote smallness at all. In fact, it might be lacking in semantic sense. So it's purely used in a pragmatic way here, and it's also optional. The diminutive pattern that was most often used on given names was fa'lul. It's used optionally as in hypocristic forms, so Maryam becomes Maryum, and that denotes politeness or affection. However, when we look at proper nouns, the diminutive form becomes no longer optional. So Al-Gala is a common noun in Gulf Arabic meaning fort, but Lajlea is a specific fort in Bahrain, and you cannot reverse the process by making this diminutive form back into Al-Gala. You would not be referring to the same place. So most of these proper nouns that I looked at were lexicalized in the diminutive form. In addition, the diminutive form was used to disambiguate places that had the same name. So in Qatar, there are 2 places that have been known in the past as Al-Khor. One of them was also known as Khor Hassan, and the other was Khor Shagig. However, Lorimer specifically points out that one of them was called Lakhwer to differentiate it from the other one. So here's Lorimer's quote on the topic. There doesn't seem to be any reference to size here, but pragmatically the use of the diminutive was to differentiate 2 places with the same name. And it also is a shortcut because now we don't have to say the full name, Khor Hassan or Khor Shagig. We can just call one Al-Khor and the other Lakhwer. In my data from Lorimer, I found about 50 pairings of names in which one was diminutive and the other was not diminutive, and these are all places that are geographically adjacent and from the same Arabic root. And this is somewhat speculative, but it is possible that one of these places was named after the other, or that they bear some sort of historical relationship. So in contrast to the use of the diminutive in common nouns, the use of the diminutive in place names was almost never optional. So I found about 1,500 diminutive place names in Lorimer, but only around a dozen of those were optionally diminutive. It does also seem like the process of diminutivization was applied to some borrowed place names to make them into good Arabic names. So the Persians called a village Khargu, but Lorimer says that Arabic speakers called the same place Khuwayrij. So putting together all our qualitative observations, diminutive morphology in place names in the Arabian Peninsula was usually not optional. Diminutive morphology was used to disambiguate two places of the same name. Diminutive form was often applied to generic geographical terms, especially those having to do with water, such as muwe or awenat. The diminutive form was often applied to roots that literally denote largeness or prominence. So there's a place called Tawel in the data, which if you tried to translate it, assuming that diminutive means small, you would end up with the rather awkward translation of little long or little tall. So there's a suggestion here that that there may be a augmentative sense, which has been suggested before by Brockelman. So when you study the different senses of diminutive nouns across world languages, you find these sorts of categories. However, the only one that could be construed as having a relation to proper nouns is exactness. So it could be that the special use of the diminutive in Arabic proper nouns has a relation to that semantic category, or it could be that that there is another category, linguistic properness, which could be a special sense of the diminutive. So Jarofsky's list of possible senses of the diminutive has received some criticism because it doesn't account in any way for the overlap in function between diminutive nouns and augmentative nouns. For example, either could be pejorative or either could be used as a hypocristic in Portuguese, for instance. In addition, Jarofsky's model does not account for the fact that diminutives can have an augmentative sense. So Brockelman, in his study of Arabic diminutives, does point out that most Arabic diminutive forms can be used in an augmentative way. I wanted to see what this diminutive morphology was referring to in the real world and my biggest data source was toponyms. So I took my toponyms from Lorimer and I coded them with dichotomous variables. I excluded about 1,200 names from this portion of the study because most of them were from non-Arabic speaking provinces, so I wanted to hone in on Arabic specifically. So I ran a number of chi-square tests using my dichotomous variables, and I found these 5 variables had statistically significant relationships with diminutive morphology. So there was a positive relationship with Bedouin areas where Bedouin type dialects of Arabic were spoken. There was also a positive correlation with ownership, which suggests linguistic properness. There was also a strong link between diminutive morphology and freshwater sources, and there was a negative link between diminutive morphology and permanent habitation, as judged by agriculture or permanent settlements or buildings. In addition, there was a weak link between diminutive morphology and prominence, meaning places such as mountains or capes. So that suggests that, again, that the diminutive noun here might have an augmentative sense. Among inhabited locations, the highest proportion of the diminutive was among forts and camping grounds, which suggests a connection with Bedouins' roles in Gulf societies. There was also a significant link between the size of a location, and the proportion of diminutives. So hamlet, for instance, is smaller than a village, and village is smaller than a town. clearly the smaller locations did have a slightly higher percentage of diminutive nouns, and that was statistically significant. However, the diminutive form was seen in all these categories. In land formations, about 17% were morphologically diminutive, and bodies of water, names of bodies of water were about 21% diminutive. Names of fresh water sources had a much higher percentage of diminutive morphology, especially wells, which again suggests that there's a connection with Bedouin practices. The prevalence of diminutive morphology was clearly not evenly distributed across the different regions studied by Lorimer. The size of the dot here is corresponding to the percentage of toponyms that were morphologically diminutive. The dots are barely visible in areas where Arabic is not really spoken, and also there's two areas here, Dhofar and Musendem, where Arabic is often spoken as a second language, so those percentages are very small. In addition, Oman proper, as Lorimer calls it, and Bahrain also have much lower percentages than most of the other locations along the Persian Gulf here. And that's interesting because there's those two dialects are often suggested as having a typological relationship, as having South Arabian roots as opposed to the other dialects which have Nejdi roots. So that was interesting. Out of all the provinces or areas studied here, Qatar had the highest percentage of diminutive toponyms at about 33%, and this finding could relate to Johnston's contention that Qatar is linguistically conservative. So putting together all my data from Lorimer's Gazetteer, about 18% of the proper nouns in Lorimer's Gazetteer were morphologically diminutive, nearly all of them of the fu'ail pattern. And among the additional data that I gathered from other sources on Nejdi and Gulf Arabic, about 27% of wildlife names were morphologically diminutive. However, only 21.5% of those were of the fu'ail pattern, so fa'lul was much more common in these names, in these wildlife names. Among common nouns, very few were morphologically diminutive. However, this finding is probably not very useful since dictionaries tend to exclude optional morphology, and the diminutive form could optionally be applied to many different common nouns. However, it does seem like the expressive use of the diminutive is limited to certain semantic categories primarily, so primarily household nouns, whereas among all the categories of proper nouns, there was a pretty high proportion of diminutive nouns. So summing up, it has been suggested by previous researchers that there is a link between Bedouin dialects of Arabic and diminutive nouns, and this was strongly corroborated in my data. I also found that the pattern fu'ail appears to have a special sense in proper nouns, and it has a different functionality than it does in common nouns. And this special sense of the diminutive in proper nouns has not been accounted for in previous semantic models of diminutives or augmentatives. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your comments.